Hey everyone, Anarch here, and this is another one of these sort of one-off episodes. However, it's really a follow-up to the previous video I did responding to Second Thought on the topic of authoritarianism. Every time I make a video where I critique the authoritarian left, or I just critique authoritarianism in general, people always ask the same question at some point, and that is, what is the alternative? How do you do a revolution from the bottom up? Or revolution without authoritarianism? Now, previously, I've actually made kind of a lot of videos on that topic, not only Anarch Abridged videos, which you can go watch, but also the longer video essays that I do. If you are looking to understand the praxis of how to move forward, I highly recommend you watch the video Constructing the Revolution. And if what you're trying to do is understand the near-term goal, not necessarily the end goal, but a goal that we should aim for in order to move toward the sort of society that we're trying to achieve, you should watch the video After the Revolution. And if the topics of this video and the previous video interest you, and you're really looking for more of a deep dive into anarchist theory and to understand how power structures function and what authoritarianism and libertarianism and all of those things actually are, I highly recommend you watch the video series that I'm doing called A Modern Anarchism. However, none of those are strictly necessary for you to understand what I'm talking about here. Before we continue, I want to offer a sort of caveat. And that is, it's impossible to talk about how to do a revolution without at the same time talking about end goals. And that's because there is this concept called means-ends unity. Means-ends unity says that the means that you use to achieve something have to be consistent with the thing that you are attempting to achieve. And that the thing you are attempting to achieve has to be reasonable to achieve with the means that you have available or could have available. I mention this because it's always a tricky question of, do we talk about the society we're trying to achieve, or do we talk about our methods for achieving that society first? Here, I'm going to be talking about the sort of society we want to achieve first. After all, it may not be entirely clear why we choose the methods that we do if we don't know what it is that we're trying to achieve. So let's start by recapping what is meant by libertarianism and mutuality. First, we are attempting to achieve libertarianism. Libertarianism is the degree to which power is socially distributed. That is to say, the ability to make decisions is held by a larger and larger number of people. The other is mutuality, which is the degree to which some power structure maintains itself through self-defense, cooperation, and free thought. But several people in the comments asked the question, why are these desirable? What is the purpose of us trying to achieve these relations? And that video wasn't really devoted to answering that question. All that video was about was just trying to lay out what is authoritarianism, what is its opposite, not necessarily why authoritarianism is bad or why its opposite, libertarianism, is good. However, what I want to do is at least briefly talk about why it is that we're even attempting to achieve these things. In leftist theory, the reasoning for why we are attempting to achieve the society that we are aiming for the longest time, and this goes all the way back to Marx, in fact, and some of those before him, is that when we are alienated from control over our own lives and the world that surround us, we are made miserable by this interaction. We become like automatons, like robots in this process. This essentially leads us to having no agency. It diminishes our autonomy and our ability to choose. And you can see that in your daily life, in a general sense, that when somebody else chooses for you, when you don't have a say in it, when you don't have any decision-making power, this will generally tend to be a subjugating force. This will lead to domination. When decision-making is no longer under your control, then you don't really get to decide whether you are dominated or whether you get to consent to the relations that you are involved in. This is why in my work, I say that the basic conception here is that we want to have power over our lives. Power is the ability to enact one's desires, or the ability to enact one's will. Alienation from control over one's life makes one powerless. And we're all seeking to have power to control the world around us and our own destiny. So the anarchist is attempting to create structures which reunite us with our natural, organic, occurring powers in the world. With that in mind, it's now important to understand what I call the 4 fields of power structures. The 4 fields of a power structure are individual conditioning, interpersonality, social structures, and environmental structures. So I'll kind of briefly go over all 4 of these. The first, individual conditioning, includes your psychology, like your ideas, your expectations, your political ideology, but also the condition of your body, like how strong or weak you are, how fit are you. It would also include, for example, your sexual morphology. The second is interpersonality. Interpersonality is your interaction with those who are in your immediate sphere of life. That would be like, your friends, your family, your partners in a relationship, the people you work with in your workplace, even including people you interact with in the city around you. This is to be contrasted from social structures. Social structures are those structures which continue functioning by way of our broad social expectations. They act as a way to constrain our activity and behaviors and establish expectations about how we all act in the world. So, an example of a social structure might be the construct of law. You'll notice that there's no actual programming of the universe such that the law exists. The law is only enforced by way of our expectations, which is to say how close we abide to that law, and enforcement. That is to say, it creates the expectation there will be punishment, and therefore we are supposed to obey by that reasoning. However, examples of social structures might also be things like organizations, especially as that organization grows larger and larger and includes many people who are not just in your interpersonal sphere. It would also include things like the state, or capitalist firms would also be social structures. Another example of a social structure would be things like white supremacy or patriarchy. Each of these are created and enforced through our social expectations. The last would be environmental structures. Environmental structures are actually the majority of the universe. Environmental structures is our environment. And that includes a lot of stuff. That includes the roads we drive on. That includes the forests. That includes the planet. That includes also the means of production, which is something that is very focused on by Marxists. So power structures are determined by all 4 of these fields. And what I mean by that is the way that power works in the world, the constraining factors to how we are able to make decisions, how we are able to carry out our will, how we are able to satisfy our desires, are reliant on all 4 of these fields. Different desires and different needs are going to be satisfied by way of different combinations of these parts of a power structure. And it should be said, power structures aren't necessarily good or bad. Power is not necessarily good or bad. They're both neutral, depending on how they're constructed and how the relations between each of these 4 fields are developed. So, whereas in authoritarianism, you have a concentration of power in the hands of very few people, and therefore the vast majority of people are alienated from control of the world around them, under libertarianism, you have the distribution of power to a very large number of people, which means that a large number of people are able to enact their will. That is to say, a large number of people are made powerful. The sorts of structures that anarchists advocate in order to create what are called horizontal power structures are those wherein we all come together and we make decisions together. So simplifying that, it will often look like councils wherein we all meet together and we make directly democratic decisions. Now, what most anarchists use is what is called consensus, which is where we are trying to get absolute agreement among everyone that is present in that council structure. However, there's all kinds of mechanisms which may be used and have been used by anarchists throughout history. These power structures come together to make decisions in larger and larger agglomerations by combining the decisions of larger and larger amounts of people in order to create that consensus at larger and larger scales. This may sound kind of hard to imagine. In fact, it may sound impossible to coordinate a wide-scale society using a structure that is so bottom-up as this. However, if you're just looking for a brief understanding of what this might look like, I recommend you go watch my video after the revolution. In other words, we're trying to create a society where we eliminate as much alienation from power as conceivably possible, which means that we are trying to eliminate alienation of the individual from themselves, from the individual from those around them in their interpersonality, from the individual in their ability to control all of the organizations and social structures they're involved in, and from the individual and their environment, which is a big issue in the modern era, as we can see with the wide-scale havoc that we've wreaked upon the planet. Notice that in every one of those fields, when we are alienated from control over those fields, we see that there is a huge amount of devastation that is caused. That's because when the decision-making is being made by a very small group of people, that group of people doesn't really have to take into account what you want. They can only take into account what is necessary to maintain the rulership of that narrow group of people. So, with this in mind, this pretty easily segs us into the other section of this video, and that is, how do you actually do a revolution without authoritarianism? The answer to the question is going to involve the concept we discussed a minute ago, and that is means ends unity. If we want to achieve the sort of society that I've discussed there, then we're going to have to use means that are commensurate with that possible society. In anarchist and libertarian socialist literature, this is referred to as prefiguration. Prefiguration is sometimes referred to by a sort of motto, and that is building the new in the shell of the old. Prefiguration involves creating as many of the relations of that future society that we desire within the here and now. And this is because anarchists also believe in what is called direct action. Direct action is taking action in the here and now, which doesn't use intermediaries or some person that acts in our stead, but instead is us acting for ourselves. So, prefiguration is creating power structures through direct action, which abide by means ends unity. If we want to have a future society that looks like we have described, then we're going to have to start building it. There is no time when a power structure that is unlike our future society is going to simply decide to give us that future society, especially considering that power structures that are made otherwise are going to want to maintain themselves. This is a fundamental feature of how power structures function. Power structures seek to perpetuate themselves. So what this means is, when you create power structures that are contrary to your end desires, what you're really doing is creating power structures which are going to prevent you from achieving those end desires. Even though in the interim, they may claim that they are going to carry out your will, when the time comes, if they have to decide between their benefit and your benefit, you have to know that those who have power are going to choose in their own interest. And therefore, even if individuals want to do otherwise than what the social structure is built to do, they're not really going to be able to. The social structure is built in such a way that it must function as it does. If some individual decides that it wants to do something which is contrary to the needs of the social structure or the power structure which has been built, then that power structure is going to find a way to oust them. Both the individuals that are involved are probably going to try to push them out of that position of power, and the social structure just isn't going to function as well because they're not fulfilling their role within the totality of the structure. What that means is we have to start creating horizontal power structures here and now, not wait for some future time when people we have given power with the supposed outcome that they are going to relinquish it at a later date, just do so out of the kindness of their hearts. This is the difference between hierarchical power and horizontal power. Revolutions that are made top-down put power in the hands of very few people, and we have to trust that they will do the things that we all desire afterwards. Revolution from the bottom up consists in building the structures that we need in the here and now to the maximal degree that is possible. And here's the thing, it may sound a lot harder to do a bottom-up revolution, and it is. However, every single time that we've seen a mass movement take place which actually has any capability of creating a revolution, it's because it started bottom up. And that might sound surprising to you, given that you probably associate revolution with a vanguard or a small minority of people carrying out a sort of violent coup. However, every example of a revolution that we have that actually succeeded was preceded by the development of power structures that were down on the level of people. In the majority of revolutions that we've seen, which considered themselves socialist or communist revolutions, that consisted in building a large number of unions and trade union structures and other varieties of structures which empowered the people. These structures then work together in order to push the boundaries of society, in order to expand and create more of these sorts of structures, more unions, more trade unions. And then, once they achieved a critical mass from the bottom up, it was not trivial, but an obvious outcome that some group of people who were to push just a little bit harder would be able to achieve some form of coup. So what we're advocating here is that we do the bottom-up revolution and we create power for the people in the here and now, but we don't give power to a small vanguard in order to domineer the revolution, in order to jump into the driver's seat at the last minute and take credit for everything that has actually been done down at the grassroots level. Instead, what we need to do is develop structures which prevent that from happening. Authoritarianism is counter-revolutionary. If you'd like to learn more about this concept, I actually did a video series called The State is Counter-Revolutionary, where I lay out this exact idea using real examples from the USSR and Maoist China. So what kinds of structures should we be building in the here and now? Well, as I've already said, there are these 4 fields of power structures, and that is to say, we need to be changing people's individual conceptions of the world and radicalizing people. We need to be changing our interpersonality to be more cooperative and to actually be amenable to a social revolution. We need to be building new social structures, aka horizontal organizations and unions and so on here down at the level we're at, and altering environmental conditions so that we are able to repair the rift between humanity and the ecology. However, there's another list of 4 that I want us to pay attention to. This list of 4 is what I call the 4 pillars of prefiguration, and it's laid out in my video, Constructing the Revolution. The 4 pillars are councils, economics, defense, and intelligence. By councils, I mean we need to create those bodies wherein we can all come together and make decisions together. I've kind of described what those councils might be in the previous section of this video, but those can actually take a lot of different forms. A union might be understood as a council, a workers' council, but a tenant union could also be understood as a sort of tenants' council. Councils can be created in a lot of different ways. I'm essentially using this to broadly refer to all of those places where people are empowered to make decisions together from the bottom up. Secondly, by economics, I'm including a wide variety of possible things. Obviously, again, we have unions because unions interact with economic forms, but there's also examples such as cooperatives, which is where the workers actually have ownership and the ability to make decisions within their company. This also includes things like free stores, where everybody is just free to come and go and take what they please and leave what they have. Forms of direct distribution and mutual aid, which are to everyone's benefit who is involved. Next, we have defense. Defense is what it sounds like. It is our ability to defend the structures we are constructing. This includes things like building militias, wherein people are armed and taught how to defend themselves. It also includes things like harm reduction, being medics at protests, or providing medical services for people who need them. Each of these serve to allow us to defend ourselves from the structures that exist and the later possible imposition of those structures upon us. Defense is crucial if our revolution ever builds to a point that it is an actual threat to the prevailing society. We have to know that a time will come when we have to defend that revolution, and that may involve use of violence in order to stop ourselves from being destroyed by the hierarchical powers that prevail. Lastly, we have intelligence. And by intelligence, I mean, for example, our ability to embed in enemy structures, to gather knowledge about the enemy, to find out how things are functioning, to publish sensitive data about our enemies to the public, to do spy work when it is necessary, and to gather information which may be later useful in order to understand who our possible enemies are. Intelligence is also a crucial pillar of prefiguration. None of these can be left out. If we don't have intelligence, for example, we're not going to know what the enemy is doing. We're not going to know what their plans are and how they're moving in the world as we proceed. We have to understand that all four of these pillars will be necessary, just like those four fields of power structures will be necessary. And if we can keep our mind on all of these needs at the same time as we develop our power structures, we can actually develop power for the people. Not in a metaphorical sense, like when the state is empowered and claims that it stands in for our needs, but in the real sense that we now have power, that the people now make decisions about the world around them, that alienation from decision-making in society is eliminated to the maximal degree possible. We don't have to wait for that. We don't have to wait for some far future where the communists tell us that eventually we will have this ideal society. We can start now creating the structures which will eliminate that alienation, which will allow us to transform the conditions that we live in. But that's about it for this video. I hope that was helpful. If it was, then go down below and click like. And if you like this video, go click subscribe because I do a lot of videos just like this one on this channel. Last, if you value the work that I'm doing on this channel, please go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anarch, A-N-A-R-K. And there are various tiers. There's $2, $5, $7, $10, a bunch of different ways you can contribute. And if you do, we have a Discord server. Just send me a DM after you become a patron and I'll give you the invite. But anyway, that's it for this video. I hope that was helpful. I felt like it was kind of needed after that last video. I always try to balance criticism with construction. So there's me being prefigurative in the here and now. Anyway, I'll see y'all next time.